Welcome back to the Daily Drum on WHUR and Sirius XM Channel 141. This is the Inside segment. I'm Harold Fisher. Tonight, we take a closer look at racist incidents at a Montgomery County public high school and what's being done to address the issues there. Some parents, students, educators, and lawmakers are not happy with how the issues have been handled. So what should be the plan of action moving forward to foster a more inclusive environment? Well, my guest tonight is Will Jawando, Montgomery County Council Vice President and Chair of the Council's Education and Culture Committee. Councilmember Jawando, thank you so much for joining the conversation. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Sure thing. Let me first start with a few facts about Montgomery County as it relates to some of these incidents. Black students make up 22% of the student population in the Montgomery County public school system. 12% of the teachers in the Montgomery County public school system are Black. Racist incidents in the county overall have skyrocketed in recent years, with police reporting nearly 500 hate incidents last year. That's a 195% increase from 2022. And in 2023, 44% of bias-related incidents were related to race and 30% targeting African Americans. Even before we get into some of the issues of the past week or so, Council Member, when you hear some of those numbers, what goes through your mind?
Well, they're sobering, right? You would not, I have 4 children in the school system. Myself, I went to the school system for part of my educational career, and I chair the education committee. So both personally, professionally, that makes me sad, and unfortunately, it's not out of the norm of what we're seeing in other parts of even the region or the country. We've seen an increase in these types of hate bias incidents. That doesn't make it right, doesn't make it okay, but we have to understand the context and the environment that we're in, and you have to have a plan to combat it. But it's troubling. We've seen it in multiple communities, certainly in the Black community. We've seen it in the immigrant community. We've seen it in the Jewish community, and you've seen this rise. I will say we have to be very careful. Number one, when I hear that, I don't want it to be normalized in any way. This is not normal. This is not acceptable. And we have to have not only a response that's timely, and I know we'll talk about that, but we also have to have a long-term plan to address this going forward, because this is a symptom of the original sin of America that has existed before you and I were born and for hundreds of years. And we know that America, as great as she is, has had issues with welcoming and diverse people, and with racism and with misogyny and with anti-immigrant sentiment. And that is part of who we are too. So we are on a long journey of folks of how do we secure progress and maintain it, right? One of the things that I'm always cognizant of is that progress requires vigilance. You can't just rest on your laurels. If you just because you become diverse doesn't mean it's going to automatically work well. You have to work hard to make sure that diversity comes with acceptance, inclusion, and a pushback against hate. So I think about all those things when I hear those numbers, because that's where we are.
Let's talk about this most recent issue. The N-word was written on the desk of a Black student at Wooten High School on December 2nd. And it's my understanding that the students reported the incident to school officials on the day that it happened, but parents were not alerted until at least 4 days later, that Friday. And correct me if I'm having any of these lists of events incorrect or inaccurate. But after that, last Friday, the principal at Wooten was placed on administrative leave, Douglas Nelson. And on Wednesday, Dr. Joseph Bostic was appointed the acting or interim principal. Now, since all of this, the school system has issued an apology for its slow response, and adding that the school teachers and staff are getting professional development training first and foremost, and that's this is a lot that I've just shared. Um, Obviously, this wasn't the first incident of this kind that was made public. There was an incident back in May where someone was photocopying racist comments. They photocopied some paper and distributed them around school. This was back in May. So a lot of parents, I'm sure, are saying, "What's going on in Wooten?"
Yeah, I understand that sentiment. I think, again, you quoted some numbers at the beginning around the increase system wide, right? And that's also reflective in our community, right? Like, so our schools are microcosms of our community, and one of the byproducts of being one of the most diverse communities in the nation, which is a beautiful thing, with a 20% Black, 20% Latino, 15% Asian, 45% white, comes with that responsibility of everyone living together in a way that everyone is treated fairly and equitably and in a welcoming manner. And that's always been a challenge. It's one that we can rise to. But yes, at Wooten and specifically with these incidents over the last 2 years, really, there's been some high profile incidents, but there's also been things, other things that students have complained about. For example, last November, my committee, we held a session on the anti-racist system audit. Our school system, one of the things we have done that most school systems haven't, is we did an anti-racist system audit over multiple years. It went into talking to students, to teachers, to parents, about how they feel about the system, and it came with some very harrowing results. And it shows that we have significant issues with how students feel they are treated, with how certain schools are doing better than others. And it gave us a lot of data across our 211 schools in our system. And now there's an action plan out of that to address them. Part of it's professional development, part of it's hiring a more diverse teaching workforce. There's a whole plan on the website. One of the things we're going to be doing in January in our committee is saying, well, where are you with this plan? Because you have an instance here where the protocols of the school system regarding hate bias and racist incidents was not followed, right? Parents should have been notified the same day because these things are traumatic to kids. Anyone who's had kids, they come home, they're dealing with the day, it's on their mind. And you need to be able to equip parents and caregivers with the information so that they can speak with their students before it festers. And it's very clear that these 12 students in the Black Student Union, as well as others and allies and non-Black students who have stepped up and been just as outraged, have been impacted by this. And so step one is follow your own protocols. And the school system admitted that they didn't, and that the principal did not in this instance. And that's why they were put on leave. But then that's the immediate thing. How do you respond to an incident? And you must do that right in the proper way. But then there's this much longer and deeper, and I would argue just as important work of addressing the underlying causes of these things. Cultural understanding, training, disparate discipline policy, and how it's applied. What courses are taught at the schools and who's lifted up and what voices are heard, how student organizations are treated. There's a lot of things, how conflict is resolved. And that work takes time. It doesn't happen overnight, but you have to have a commitment to it. And I think that's one of the things. Now we have a new superintendent. He's hiring someone who will he has a position open right now to hire someone who will mandate will be around equity and inclusion, who will, I'm assuming, monitor this work. And so there was a lot to do, but there were failures in this instance for sure. But there's also a lot to do to make sure we're changing the culture, not only at Wooten, but system-wide.
Do you have any idea why those protocols were not followed? Why the former principal Douglas Nelson did not elevate this issue to the administration, and why what took so long to report this to parents?
I don't. I will say that it was an error, and the school system admitted that. I will also say that I know students and families and parents, particularly in the Black community, have felt that sometimes when their incidents of hate and racism are not taken with the same level of gravity as others. Now, any instance of hate and bias should be addressed and is wrong against any community. But what we don't want is disparity in how it is responded to, right? Because that doubles the harm, right? When you say you have a set of protocols that should apply to any instance of hate bias, and it's being applied differently in the anti-Black context, that is not only the incident itself, then it also does double harm. And you have to question, and these students and families have questioned, do you care about this in the same way? And that's double, that's a double harm. And I will say the school system as a whole doesn't feel that way, but you have to be aware of how, if you don't follow your own protocols, of how those actions kind of land on these students. They talked about the microaggressions, other things that have happened in a school where they are the minority in the case of Wooten. And there's 12 students in a school of over 1,000 that are in the Black Student Union, to give you context.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you make an interesting point, because as we have seen, just talking about the many media reports that we have seen about blatant attacks against members of the Jewish community, not only in the broader community in Montgomery County, in churches and in neighborhoods, but also in schools, anti-Semitic comments, swastikas, and the like. And it just seems that some of those attacks against the Jewish community have been immediately made public, have been elevated, and protocols were followed.
Right. And again, it's wrong. There's no more wrong or more or less wrong in this, but you just want everyone to have the same level of response. I think in the Black community, look, and this is WHUR, and we're talking from a Black community perspective. Obviously, we are in a community inclusive of everybody.
Right.
But it reminds me of things, having worked as a civil rights lawyer my whole life, of disparate discipline outcomes, of disparate outcomes in housing, when you have the same people come with the same income and loan information, and one's given a loan and one isn't. Johnny raises his hand and Malik raises his hand, and one goes to the principal and one doesn't. And so we know that exists. That is what systemic racism is. It's over time a dulling or of the impact in almost a kind of a normalization, as I said, systemically. It might not even be conscious, right? It's not saying someone is intentionally saying, I don't want to help Black students. It's saying that it becomes so pervasive. I've gotten emails from members of the community that have said, oh, these are isolated incidents. This doesn't reflect on the school. And to that, I'd say, well, it does. It reflects on all of us, because it's our community that allows it to happen. And
hold that point, if I will, Councilman. I've got to take a really quick break, and I'll let you finish your point. On the other side, don't forget, you can hear this and every edition of the Daily Drum Insight segment via podcast on WHUR.com. The original Quiet Storm with Raheem Devon is next. That's on WHUR. I'm Harold Fisher. This conversation continues on Sirius XM channel 141 and 96.3 HD2 in just a few seconds. Welcome back to the Daily Drum on Sirius XM Channel 141. I'm Harold Fisher. We continue our discussion about racist incidents at Wooten High School in Montgomery County. My guest is Will Jawando, Montgomery County Council Vice President and Chair of the Council's Education and Culture Committee. Before the break, Council member, you were talking about disparities and the like. Please continue your point.
Well, yeah, just the point that it's not new to America, particularly not new to Black Americans, to see these disparities in how harm is inflicted and when it is and how it's responded to. You needn't look no further than the criminal justice system, disparate application of suspension and expulsion policies. Now, we've made progress in Montgomery County on these things, but not enough. And it shows that we still have work to do. And I think that's why it was totally appropriate for the school system and the superintendent to apologize for the lack of protocol being followed, acknowledging the harm that has done on top of the incident itself, and then charting a path forward towards how do we get better. And that's where these dialogues are going to be important. They made a leadership change. The culture of the school obviously is important. So I am pleased that it is, though not gone the way we would want it to have gone from the beginning, that there has been action taken and there will be continued action so that we can move towards a place where a culture and a system in a school where this is much less likely to happen.
I do want to drill down a little bit more on that in just a bit, but one of the other things that is fascinating, because one would want to ask, hasn't Montgomery County school system learned about addressing transparency in the wake of the Dr. Joe Beidelman incident? And that, again, that was Montgomery County Public Schools. But even outside, even if there were no incidents going on in Montgomery County, if you just look across the line in Northern Virginia, the Loudoun County fentanyl overdoses, where it's the same kind of situation. Montgomery County situation had to do with race. The fentanyl overdoses had to do with student safety and drug use. But even in Loudoun County, these things happened. Nobody's talking about it until someone started talking about it. The sheriff had to come out and say, hey, there's an issue in a particular high school. But back to Montgomery County, why does there seem to be an issue with just calling a thing and saying there's an issue, let's get out in front of it and control the narrative?
Well, I will say, Harold, I do think we are further ahead than most districts in doing that, right? As I said, if you go down of the, tens of thousands of school districts across this country, very few, and none others that I know of in the state of Maryland, have conducted an anti-racist system audit where they have spent multiple years and engaging the community on, okay, how do you feel? What's going on? Looking at statistics, both subjective and objective data points about what's going on in this system. And they published that. And the results are clear. We have a problem, right? This was a couple of years ago. Now the question is, okay, what are we going to do about it? And I give us credit for digging in and acknowledging, and not only acknowledging, but measuring the extent of the problem. And so that's you can't fix what you can't name and measure. But we do have work to do. So I'll say that because I do think that is a way of saying, like, hey, we have to fix this. We're not running away from diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're not running away from that systemic and institutional and individual racism exists. It does. Now, how do we address it as a system and a community together? That's the really, really hard work. But in the meantime, realizing that there will be incidents, right? Because the school system is 90% people as far as the 25,000 staff, and then the 160,000 students, the 211 schools. I remind people, our school system is the 15th largest in the country. So it's an entity in and of itself. So, the idea that you can have a monitor that everything's going to be equal across the board in all those schools and every day. Of course, it's not going to happen. But how do you create a culture and work and improve in a data-driven way to improve those numbers and to improve how people feel about their school district and to lower these numbers of incidences? So that we do have to do. In this instance, I think even though it took a few days at the individual school level, once it became elevated, and this, I've been talking to the superintendent about this as well. We have to be very quick about communicating to parents, saying what harm has been done and what we're going to do to fix it, what that plan of action. And they did that. It was not as quickly as it should have gone. But I think in the past, the MCPS of the 80s or 90s, I think would have taken even longer or denied that there was a problem. So I do think the progress has been made. It didn't go the way it should have here. But the hard work is going to be the longer term work of not only addressing this harm in the short term and medium term, but how do we put in place better hiring practices, better training to shift culture holistically.
And that's my next question. We all know that racism, prejudice is not something that we are born with. These things are taught. During that anti-racism audit that you just spoke about, what is it that surprised you?
What, I'm sorry, what is it that surprised me about the audit?
About the results.
Yeah, to tell you the truth, Harold, I wasn't very surprised. Mm-hmm. I've been in Montgomery County my whole life, grown up in this area, went to schools, my kids go there. I mean, we are a microcosm of America, and America, again, was founded on the anti-Black racist principle. It was developed through, chattel slavery, which has its basis the dehumanization of Black people and indigenous people and other people over time, right? That came here from other places, whether it was the Irish, the Jewish, any immigrant. Everyone went through a period where they were othered. Some assimilated better than others, right? People that look like you and I, we don't assimilate, in the sense that we are always Black. And I think that has been a struggle for this country, right? And for the world. And so the question is, I wasn't surprised to see that we were reflective of the country's history, and that Black students, you have to think too, and the history of the migration in and out of Montgomery County, and really the region. In 1980, when I was going to Montgomery County Public Schools, Black students made up, single digits, right, mm-hmm. of the student population. Black people 1950 were less than 5% of Montgomery County's population. The explosion in diversity really has happened in the last 60 years. And we've had to catch up to that. So it wasn't surprising to me that we're not complete with that work. Have we made progress? Absolutely. I served with Sidney Katz, my good friend, on the council. We sat together multiple years. When he went to Montgomery County Public Schools, they were segregated. Okay. He sits next to me, only the second African-American man to be elected countywide, African-American person to be elected countywide in this county. We sit next to each other as a representation of both where we've been, but also progress, right? And so I wasn't surprised, but I was convicted and determined to say, in my role as chair of the education committee, as a council vice president now, as a council member at large, that we're going to make progress on this. We're going to make sure we're resourcing our system and holding it accountable and making sure we're bringing in the right people with the right mindset and with the right supports to support each and every one of our students. And because every student can learn, they just need to be believed in and given the right supports. And then when stuff does happen, because stuff does happen in school, it happened for you, it happened for me, that we have a plan in place to address it fairly, to remediate students who have caused harm, to restore that situation, and to make sure it's less likely. I'll give you a data point that gives me hope about this. we have made investments in restorative justice over time, which is an approach to conflict resolution and when harm is done. And students who have, these aren't all racial incidents, but students have done something wrong and gone through this restorative process, 80+% of the time, they do not do something else again in the next couple of years. And it shows that there's the recidivism, rather, when we have a restorative approach, when they understand the harm they've caused, when they have to confront it and face it. That doesn't mean there aren't consequences, there are, but that they're much less likely to do it. And I think in instances like this, where you have a racist incident, a lot of times because it's been so normalized in our culture, students and others who are causing this harm don't fully understand the harm they're causing. And what we really need to get to, as you said, it's taught behavior. They might have heard something, they think it's okay, and they do it. But they have to understand, as do all of us, that these things are harmful, and it really inhibits the kind of community that we want to have.
Do you know whether or not the school system knows who the offending party was, who wrote the slur on the desk? And if so, what has happened?
I do not know that. And, as obviously with privacy laws related to children, we won't know that. But there is an investigation ongoing. I'm sure it's a knowable thing. I'm sure someone knows. There was a lot of students in that classroom when the Black student got up to leave and go to the bathroom or to leave and came back. Someone saw it. So the question is just the investigation has to yield that out, and there have to be appropriate consequences. But that will not and should not be something that is made public, because these are minors.
Well, no, and I wasn't looking necessarily for a name.
Just a race or ethnicity.
Yeah, but I was very curious as to.
We don't know that. Yeah.
Yeah. Whether.
But it will be wrong no matter who did it.
Yeah. And what would happen in the event, because obviously there has been a disciplinary action for the former principal. On that point, do you know Dr. Joseph Bostic?
I do.
Okay.
I do.
Because Douglas Nelson, the previous principal, is white. Dr. Bostic is Black. Obviously, this is a hyper specific appointment, temporary or otherwise. And what kind of conversations, if any, have you had with him about addressing these issues moving forward at Wooten?
Yeah, I know Dr. Bostic. He is a great educator and principal. He was at Northwood High School as an assistant principal, and now was serving as the principal intern, which is basically the principal for all intents and purposes, under the tutelage and support of another principal that mentors that person. But he had operational authority of the school at Northwood, which is
former Montgomery County Teacher of the Year.
Yes, and former Montgomery County Teacher of the Year. Yeah, I've helped award him for that. And he's one of those unicorns, what I call, I wrote a book a couple years ago, as you know, My 7 Black Fathers.
Yes, I remember.
7 men that impacted me. One of them is Mr. Williams, my 4th grade math teacher and MCPS, the only Black male teacher I would have. Black male teachers are still woefully underrepresented in the school system across the country, about 2% of the profession. So Dr. Bostic has had a big impact already. I will say this, I have not spoken to him since he made this appointment yesterday. I plan to. He's going to need support, and one of the things that struck out to me and why I was compelled to speak out on behalf of the community, this situation and the students, is because all too often the folks who have been harmed are asked to remedy the harm. And these students have stepped up and advocated for themselves in a way with allies who are with non-Black students and community members, but that takes a burden on you, right? That has a weight. And similarly, Dr. Bostic is coming into a situation where there's been many months, it's not years, of issues brewing here related to this issue. And in addition to everything else the principal has to deal with, learning the new culture, learning the staff, and making sure students are learning and feeling supported, and that faculty and staff are feeling supported. So he's going to need support in that work. Having worked myself for the first Black president, Barack Obama, when he got handed an economy that was in the toilet, and said, here, fix it. That situation, I want to make sure that Dr. Bostic has what he needs. And I've talked to the superintendent about this, that he has the support that he needs to come in and begin to move the culture and build on what's good happening at Wooten. Wooten is a great school. And so, but yeah, I haven't spoken to him yet. I will speak to him. And that's my focus, is making sure he has the support, and that we make sure we get a good person at Northwood, which is a school with a lot of kids, mostly Black and brown, where he had built community and culture over several years. And we have to remember that they're losing a good principal too. So I want to make sure that they get what they need as well.
There's supposed to be a meeting this week about the Wooten High School incident. Can you tell me anything about that? When, where, and what the focus would be?
I do not have specifics. There is going to be a community meeting. I don't believe it's been publicized yet. There'll be several meetings. There'll be meetings with students and faculty there at the school. That'll be more private. I think there will be a larger community meeting at some point. I do not have specifics on that, but I can make sure that once the public meetings are noticed, that we get it to you all and share that information.
Do you know of, or what do you believe should be the process to hold students, teachers, administrators accountable when these incidents occur? And I'm talking about more holistically, I'm not necessarily talking about punishment,
right?
But because that obviously is the process that we're seeing as part of this investigation. But moving forward, what kinds of conversations should be had with the student body, teachers, and administrators moving forward?
Yeah, so I
know you can go into a room and say, hey, don't be racist, but but that's the floor.
Right. I mean, well, look, it's a lot of things all at once, right? One, it's understanding, it's making sure there's a baseline of information where everyone, to your point, understands what happened and what the harm was, right? How people were impacted by this, and what we're trying to accomplish, right? What is the goal of this training, right? And what training will you receive? We're trying to get to a place where we're confronting we're being anti-racist actively and working against the systems that have been in place and perpetuated inequities for marginalized groups, particularly communities of color, particularly Black communities. So that involves an understanding of school culture. It involves some historical context, right? And it involves understanding workforce diversity, right? You mentioned at the top of our broadcast the numbers of we know the schools across the country, and Montgomery County's no different. It's mostly white, mostly women that are teachers, right? So how do we not run away from that? That's a great profession, but how do we diversify and then make sure that people that come from different backgrounds understand what we're trying to accomplish and understand the students they're working with? How do you address the conditions that can create a culture of making sure you respond? One of the things I will always talk about is our teachers have a tough job. It's, you go into a classroom with 30 students where we're at, and 15 of them are students who are in poverty, may have not had breakfast that morning. Another 10 speak English as a second language, and another 7 or 8 have an IEP or in special education services. That's all those kids can learn, but they're going to need support. And when you have teachers stretched to the max without aides, that makes it even harder to differentiate and meet students where they are and give them what they need. So there's a lot of levels to this. But I think so. And the other thing I'll say on this is that it's ongoing. It's not let's sit you in a room, tell you not to be racist, and have a 2 to 3 hour training and then check the box and say we did it. This is ongoing professional development with that is engaging and interactive, and that is a commitment by the principal and staff. That's one of the reasons leadership is so important at the system level, but also in the building level, is because you have to have a commitment. We have had schools that have had a commitment to restorative justice, have a commitment to changing culture, and they have successfully done so. So part of it too is learning from other schools and other cultures that have done this maybe better and that have had less negative results on the anti-racist system audit, for example. So it's about sharing information and community. So it's all those things at once. And it's an ongoing commitment. You're never at the destination. You're continually improving. Just like education, you should be a lifelong learner.
Well, that brings me to my next question, because there are existing policies regarding hate speech, discrimination. That was one of the big issues. It's on the county school website. How do you believe they need to be updated, or do you believe that they just need to be adhered to?
Yeah, I think that our policies are good. And I think, you can always update a policy, right? We've been updating the Constitution since we got here, and interpreting it and perfecting it. And there's always laws passed every year. I'm a legislator. That's what we do. But I do think that our policies are good. They lay out a clear process. As with anything written on paper, the implementation is everything. And you have to, one, understand it, adhere to it, take it seriously, and implement it with fidelity. And that did not happen in this case. It's clear. The school system has admitted that. Okay, how do we make sure that we get better and that we do adhere to the policies going forward? Look, and as I said, the school system is 90% people. We're dealing with human beings. I'm not perfect. You're not perfect. People are going to make mistakes, but it should not be going on in a long period of time. There should be checks and balances. It shouldn't rest with just one person. It should be a culture where everyone in the building feels empowered, including leadership and staff, to make sure that these things are addressed. And so I think that it's less about, while you can always have good policy improvement, it's less about updating the policies. It's more about making sure they're implemented, understood, and implemented with fidelity.
You spoke about the Black Student Union and their allies. What do you as a council member need to send the proper message? I mean, you can have Council Vice President Will Jawando, a Black man, talk to the BSU, preaching to the choir, same church, same Bible. But who do you believe, outside of the culture, but within the school system, really needs to speak up and send a message? Is it the superintendent? Does it have to do with council members? Is there somebody else, even outside, who can help better deliver the message that things need to change?
The answer is yes. All of those people and more. This is a collective responsibility. We didn't get here on our own. And from the bus driver, we transport 100,000 students a day. Mm-hmm. That bus driver that opens the door should be courteous, greeting and smiling. We need to make sure they're well compensated and that they're taken care of too. So that from the person who walks them into the school building, if some student has breakfast or lunch, from the teachers in front of them, to the paraprofessionals, to the janitors in the building, the food service workers, the principal, the assistant principals, we all need council members, the MCPS administration. Everyone needs to be on board. That's why we passed a racial equity and social justice law. One of the first bills I voted on in 2019 as a council member was to create a racial equity and social justice law for the county, the entire county, every entity that we have. And we have work to do to make sure that is implemented. And that is vigilant, ongoing work. You're not going to erase 400 plus years of racism, both individual, systemic, and structural, overnight. But what you can do is you can have a commitment to getting better each and every day. And that it's hard. It's hard work. And so when you say who needs to be more involved, we all need to be more involved. The parents, the community members need to talk about it. We need to be able to have open spaces where someone can say, which I've heard, well, I've heard the N-word used by Black people, so why is it a thing when someone else uses it? Someone needs to be able to ask that question and not feel that they're going to be attacked. And we can get into the reasoning why that's faulty logic, because the word was used to subjugate and dehumanize Black people, which is why it should never be used. That's why the NAACP buried it. We know it's used. That doesn't mean you have the right to use it. Like, we can have that discussion, but it just shows that teachers, everyone, we all are a product of our environment, and coming from a different perspective. And so we need to make sure, one, it's not tolerated, but two, that there's safe spaces and ongoing training and community building so that people know what we're trying to get to. Every person, parent, student, I say at Wooten and other high schools and other schools, wants their child to go to a school that's a welcoming, safe, both physical, mental, social, emotional, and high quality educational environment for their students. Everyone wants that. And if that's that's the goal, it's going to take all of us to achieve that. And this is an example of that. And that's why we're in the work. That's what we're here to do.
Montgomery County Council Vice President Will Jawando, thank you so much for chatting with us. Lots of work to do at Wooten and countywide, but I appreciate your time, sir, and we will certainly be in touch.
Thank you.
Sure thing. That is the Daily Drum for this Thursday, December 12th. I'm Harold Fisher. Good night.